Wonderful. Welcome to our third online session. Today's session will be focused on a few things. We're going to look at how we can represent our data visually to help and guide our interpretation and understanding of our data. And we're going to do that in the context of creating documents called R Markdown documents. And so I will review with you on how to create these documents to publish and communicate your data analysis in a way that is interpretable and understandable, aside from doing it in a .r file like an R script, but be able to do this in the style of what we call R Markdown, which allows us to customize documents in a way to have regular text with inline code and output as well. So we have a lot of flexibility with this. I just want to have a sense of how many people have already created a Markdown document. You could just give me a Y in the text chat if you have, or a no if you haven't. Some people have, some people haven't. Yeah, so just totally be honest because I want to see kind of where everyone's at. All right, so for instance, if you want to just have a sense of what our Markdown document is, you've seen this obviously before, but in the R Fundamental site, so all the tutorials that you've been going through that I've created, this is all done in R Markdown. So where I'm actually showing inline code together with text, okay, and some output as well. So we have a lot of flexibility using R Markdown. And specifically, I have lesson 3 highlighted here because this is where you can review some of the aspects of Markdown that I talk about, and setting up your working directory and your working environment in R. Things that are very important just to keep you organized and keep your files organized. So we'll do that today as well. I have a slide deck that's up here as well, and this is something that was also created in R Markdown. I'm just going to scroll through it just so you can have a preview, not of only what we're going to be doing, but just how you're able to include build slides and other assets using R Markdown that have headers, that have inline code with output. Okay, code and output, which is pretty handy. Especially if you are working with a team of developers, or you are documenting your code, or want to have output that's dynamic. R Markdown can be amazing for that. So there are plenty of possibilities here. So where I'd like to start is a few things, and I just ask you that you kind of like listen carefully to the set of steps. So the first thing that I like you to do is create a folder on your computer and call it something like My Data. You might have already done this before if you've done lesson 3, but if you just create a folder on your desktop called My Data, this is going to be a folder we're going to ask you to put a few files today, okay? After this, you can delete it. I don't care, but just so you have a local directory on your computer. So again, we're just going to create a folder called My Data, create on your desktop if that's just easiest. And once you've done that, I'm going to ask that you download the data for one of the activities that we'll be working on today, which is under the Materials tab. You see something called CEO Salaries? If I just click on that, that will allow me to kind of download this, you see CEO Salaries document here as well. And then after you download that CSV file, please don't open it in Excel or anything. Sometimes that tends to corrupt the file. Go ahead and move that CEO Salaries CSV file to your directory that you created on your desktop called My Data. Okay, so now you should have your data file and your folder created. Give you another second to kind of get organized with that. Any questions so far? Okay. Thank you, Mariana. I appreciate the feedback. I'm really excited to really be teaching you tonight. This is the last session. So I want to make sure that I'm here to answer any questions before we all meet in person. Where is the CSV file? So Mariana, answer the question, but it's under the materials tab as part of GoToTraining. There's something called CEO salaries, exercise 5.2 and exercise 6.2. All right, so once you have that, you put it in your folder. Then we're gonna go ahead and go to RStudio. And that part I'll follow along with you and kind of demonstrate. So here's my RStudio world, lots going on here. So what I like you to do is just say File, New File, and say R Markdown. We're going to begin by creating an R Markdown document. If you've done this already and you're ahead of the game, bear with me. Maybe there'll still be something for you to pick up as I go over this. Now, a few things. We're creating an R Markdown document. Let's say that you were extremely envious of the presentation I just showed you, and you wanted to create your own PowerPoint deck using R Markdown. Then you can choose the presentation option here, and you can create a few different, you might even see something down here that says PowerPoint. The new version of RStudio allows you to just create direct PowerPoint presentations, which is pretty cool. I choose HTML because I like to publish things on the web. Up to you. So we are going to not do that though. I just want to explain what you're looking at here. You can also create an interactive document if you wanted it as well, okay? Or have your own templates. I have a few templates here, but we will just go ahead and create a document. Let's title this, my Markdown, something like that. Put your name as the author and then just say okay. So you'll notice that it says untitled and it has a little RMD. So .rmd is the extension for a Markdown document. Everybody good so far? So this is the document we're going to be working in today, okay, for the next hour and 20 minutes or so. Few things that I want to note to you, that it says untitled 1, it hasn't been saved yet. So where do you think we want to save that? We want to save this in my data folder, okay, that one that you created in your desktop. So go ahead and say File, Save As, and make sure you save it in that My Data folder. I have a different folder. Mine are called Lecture Slides. And so I'm going to call this Markdown CEO. You can name this anything you want. I'm just calling mine Markdown CEO as the file name. Alrighty. Now that you've done this, I want you one more step in terms of our setup, in terms of our world. I would like you to save your file. And, I would like you to set the working directory for today for your R session. And the reason why we do this is then when we reference files, like the CEO dataset, we want to import it, that you don't have to remember the directory path where that file is located. So go ahead and set your working directory to the My Data folder. Okay, I'm going to choose my different working directory than yours, but you have one called My Data. And you just select the directory you want to be your default directory while you're working in R for your session. You're going to go ahead and say Open. And there you go. And you'll notice down here that this command set WD, set working directory, will actually set the directory to whatever path you tell it. So you could simply type this in or use the command that I just showed you. Anybody need me to review that? Setting our working directory. Sure, no problem. So, okay, let's kind of recap where we are. We have a folder on our desktop. It contains our CSV file, and we've saved our Markdown document in that folder as well. And now we want to set our working directory, the directory that R will reference for any of our files, to that My Data folder. And we can do that by going to Session, Set Working Directory, and then Choose Directory. And then again, you choose that directory where you want to make your working directory, which is going to be that My Data folder. I'm choosing a different one for myself. Okay? And then you'll see down here in the output for the console, this is the command it actually executed. Set WD. Good. Okay. Now, we're going to go ahead, we're going to come back to including this line in actually our Markdown document soon, okay? But I want to explain how Markdown works first. So you may want to expand your screen. I'm expanding mine so we could just see more of the screen. A few things to note here. You remember putting in this information, your title and your name, right? So you can change these to anything. This is the standard structure and syntax for our Markdown document. You don't touch this. You don't modify the colons or anything. The output will be an output as an HTML document. If you remember earlier, I showed you something that was a different output. So let me just bring up a different document. This is that slide presentation. You see the output here is an iOS slide _ presentation. Okay? If you wanted to turn whatever you're working on, this document, into, not from an HTML to an iOS slide presentation, that's all you would have to do. But you have to make sure certain things are formatted. Not everything is going to be designed for slides, so it needs to be written in a certain way. We're going to go back, just keep it an HTML document. At this point, in order to see the output, so to see what an R Markdown document looks like once it's prepared for an HTML format that can be uploaded to the web and shared with people, we use this knit button here. Everybody see this knit button? This comes from the knitr library. Knitter, you can call it, or knitr, however you want to pronounce it. So this knit button with a little ball of yarn and a knitting needle will actually do the conversion for you and launch a window. So I'm going to go ahead, you can go ahead and press knit. If there are no errors in the code, you will see your Markdown document. Now, scroll down quickly, you'll notice that you didn't write any of this code. Okay? This is just from the template when you say file, new document, new Markdown document, right? That's all that's here. But you did put this information here. And then we'll work to modify this, but this will give us a good starting point. It looks good though, right? So we can start to kind of like deconstruct. I'm going to do a little bit of a side-by-side here for you. So where it says R Markdown here, that refers to line 12, the double hashtag, which shows me like a heading level, okay? The My Markdown up here refers to the title. Okay, so you can see how it maps so far. You notice that there's some stuff that looks like R code. We'll get to that in a second. And then we see some more paragraph text on line 14 through 17 or so, 16, which is of course just this. So we can easily insert URLs and they will be automatically hyperlinked. Very cool. If we scroll down, we'll see we'll see this summary statement that says summary cars, and we see that here on line 19. So let's talk about that. So here we are running summary statistics on a data set called cars, and we're getting the output of that. Okay, and cars has, is a very simple data set. It has 2 variables, and we're just doing, and they're both continuous variables, and we can compute summary statistics on those. Not that exciting, but it shows you how you can include R code and the output, okay? And have some text above it that's completely just written in a very nice font. And then we can go down below, and then we can see this header that says including plots. We can find that header on line 22 on my code, okay? So you can see how you can start formatting this. And then we also see a default plot that was given to us that's embedded, but I don't see the code here for the plot, right? The code's not showing up. Well, if you read down below, it says, note that echo false is the parameter added to the code chunk to prevent the R code that generated the plot. So I can include code behind the scenes and not have to actually print out the code or the input, just print out the output. Okay, so I'll just prove that to you by just kind of going over, sliding my screen over a little bit, and you notice that I do have the code here, and then I have echo equals false. Okay, that means that this code won't be printed out, but it will still run. Now I'm going to explain what this means. These are R chunks, but I see a question. Mehdi, what's your question? Would you like to ask it via the mic or? Okay, go ahead. Just if everybody can mute their own microphones, because Mehdi has a question. It's totally sounding like a party. All right.
No idea how to mute mine.
So there's a green microphone, and that you should turn that into a red microphone by clicking on it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey. All right. Awesome. So I think you were just about to get into it. That where it says pressure after the letter R.
Yep.
I just wasn't sure what that was, but you were just about to get into it, so never mind.
No, never mind. You're moving the class along. All right. I love it. Mm-hmm. So, what's happening here? Let's really deconstruct it. And I'm going to just put some spaces here. I'm going to start on line 25, okay? And what I'm going to be referring to is what I have on line 29 through 31. So let's say that I want to create that plot, okay, that we just saw. I'm going to show you the slow way, and then we'll look at the fast way, okay? So anytime we want to include any R code within a markdown file, we use 3 backticks. That's that key right above the tab, or at least on my computer. And then we use 2 curly brackets, and within the curly brackets, we put the letter R. Okay, we could just keep it like that. And then we close our R chunk, it's called, with 3 backticks. And do you see kind of how that, that works there? So let's do something simple. Using R as a calculator, okay? We can put our R code here and press run, and we get the output of 6. Now, what I'm going to do, just so you can see how all this works together, I'm going to knit my document again. So you can see that input-output. So you see here, 3 plus 3, and I have my 6. Okay? Now, I have some other parameters here. In the example below, I have something called pressure. This is just a name for an R chunk. Even though it's very confusing because this is a sample that I didn't create. So if I created it, it would never, of course, be confusing. But I can call this pressure 2, okay? Just to kind of, or I can call this just like my plot. Okay, this refers directly to the name of my R chunk. Okay, my plot. Let's name the one up earlier. We can call this one my addition. Okay, and this button here allows me to run that R chunk. This button allows me to run that R chunk. Okay, still works. Now, when you're in Markdown, you can run your code even if you have something meaning echo false, meaning don't print out the code. That just means don't print out the code in the R Markdown after it's knitted to, say, an HTML document. So here, I can say echo equals true if I want to be literal. But by default, echo is true. How do I know that? Well, we set it up in the beginning. If you look at scroll all the way up, part of the default setup for an R Markdown document is what's on lines 8 through 10 in your document. So this is called R setup. This can be, you can call this pineapples if you want. This is just a name for your R chunk, right? Include equals false. Okay, that means don't include this piece of code when you generate the output for the Markdown. But it doesn't mean don't run it. It just means don't include it. Okay. And then I have knitr, which is the package, and setting a parameter, echo equals true for the entire R Markdown document. That means always print out the code. Okay. Now, we remember what was happening on line 18. This is referencing our CARS data set, which is a data set that comes preloaded in R, and we ran our summary statistics, right? Now, for whatever reason, let's say I didn't want to evaluate that. Okay, when I rerun it, I'll still get the output, but when I knit it, notice here, I don't see any output below summary CARS. So you have control around what you show and what you don't show, what you evaluate, what you don't evaluate. If you decide to show the code and show the output, just show the output, just show the code. Lots of different options here, okay? The important thing is that knowing that you have options, and for the time being, we're gonna wanna show our code, the input and the output, right? That's gonna keep us sane. We wanna be able to do that with our markdown, and then we can go back and decide what things we might wanna omit, okay? So this is what's happening. I think we've gone through the first 20 lines of code. Now we have this example here using R as an addition. I'm just going to delete that, get it back to this one, which says, which is plotting temperature on the x-axis and pressure on the y-axis. Maybe it should be reversed. We can decide. What I don't like about this example and why I like to explain it is because it's using a simple function called plot to do a scatter plot, and it's not specifying what should be x or y. And so I want you to go ahead and understand what should be x and y, right? What's going to be on the x-axis, what's going to be on the y-axis. It doesn't look like here that the designer of this decided which one to put on which. So if you go to your console window and type in view pressure, we can go ahead and look at that data. And this data is not anything you imported, just came with R. And we can look at the two variables. So when we don't specify an X and Y, it will choose temperature as X and pressure as Y. Okay, it goes in order. But let's say we wanted to do the inverse. In our markdown document, we can simply say plot pressure. Let's say we want pressure on the x-axis. Pressure, because the name of the data set's pressure, and I think the variable is called pressure. That's even confusing. Comma, pressure, $ temperature. And then do that output. Make sure I didn't make any typos there. Okay, and then I can see that. And then I can go ahead and label these, and we're going to go over how to do all of that. I'm showing you this because this is an example of a markdown document that includes plots, which is great. But the plot call that they used, I thought wasn't very easy to interpret. So I just wanted you to have a sense of what was going on here. Okay, questions on R markdown? Or knitting it? Yes, there's questions. Jerome, please.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, fantastic. I understand everything that you've explained. The only thing I'm still not quite sure of is what is echo equals false do? Is that hiding something? I'm still confused by that.
Yeah, so echo equals false hides this code. So when I knit it, if you just watch my screen real quick, I just see the plot. No code.
Okay, so if you say echo equals true, then it's going to show the the script.
It will show the code that generated this plot below. So it shows the R chunk.
Okay, cool.
So you could just omit it And by default, it will be echo equals true.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. A lot of times in R, when we use any kind of functions or anything, if it's a one that takes a Boolean, like a true or false, there's usually one as a default, and you don't have to explicitly, you just have to figure out which one it is. Okay, so, all right, good. Any other questions on our Markdown document? Saurabh, you have one. Saurabh, feel free to ask via the microphone, or if you'd like to ask via chat.
Can you hear now?
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Yeah, sorry, I think I was on mute. So my question is, I created this one R Markdown, and when I ran it, using that small green triangle, it works. Okay, but when I'm trying to knit it,
Yes.
it is saying that execution halted. There is some error, so I'm unable to publish it in HTML. So it's something I'm missing. I'm making. I'm not sure what is going on.
Yeah.
So that is my question.
Good. So let's say that I do something wrong. I forget a paren here, right? The closing paren for summary cars. And I go ahead and try to knit this. You see I'm getting an error here. So now the error is probably your fault. Sorry. Unless it's like,
So what I say, for example, summary cars, if you run it, I'm getting the I'm getting the summary statistics or whatever. I was basically calling a function, basically trying to create a histogram. So a multi-histogram actually I was trying to do, and then I was hitting that triangle. I was getting the graph, but when I'm trying to knit it right now, I'm getting an error that anonymous block and something like that, and the processing is halted. So I'm unable to publish that in HTML. So
yes. So why don't you go ahead and, if you can, cut and paste your error message right in the chat, because it will be impossible to.
I can do that.
Yeah, it might. Typically, when you get an error message, you have to debug it. And so here, line 19, that's where my problem is, and it tells me line 19 is my problem. You might get a line number in yours, and it knits the entire document, so not just one R chunk. So one R chunk may work, but others may not. Okay. So let's see. Duplicate label attitude. So you might have named in your R chunk something duplicate label. So if you name something attitude here, and then you named another one attitude, R chunks need to have unique names.
Oh, okay. That could be the thing. Okay, I know that. Okay. Yeah.
Well, fix it and let us know.
That's exactly what happened to me, and because you explained it so well, it changed it and it works perfectly.
Woohoo!
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, it's all these little things, and the debugger is our friend. Usually we can try to interpret it, but we have to learn. All right. So, any other questions on Markdown? All right. So I'm gonna transition to my slide deck. Coincidentally, that was created in Markdown. Yes, I have a love affair with Markdown. And I want to jump into visualizing our data. And I think Saurabh is already, making histograms and cool stuff like that, which is awesome. And I want us to work with the CEO data set and to visualize some data. So this is going to be a little bit of a different format than we've done before, but one that I hope that we can kind of continue on into the classroom, where I'd have a kind of a slide deck going through some examples, illustrating some concepts, and then allowing you to try them out. We'll do this for a little while, and then we'll go ahead and do an exercise, and then come back and do a little bit more visualizing, okay? So the idea is here, we're going to go through this exercise, and then we will go through exercise 5.2 as well, and see how far we get. All right, so jumping in. So in lesson number 5, you've been working to visualize data, and in addition to computing, measures of central tendency, like you did in lesson number 4, summary statistics and the like, you may want to visualize that, right? To show, say, the presence of outliers. If you're showing a scatter plot, something that may not be able to easily spot or see when just running some basic summary stats. And we can do this by using some simple functions for graphing. And some of those different functions allow us to build histograms, things called box plots, violin plots, density plots, scatter plots, and many more. And so we'll go through some basic functions from the graphic package, and then we'll apply them, and then you'll have an exercise to apply them again, and then we'll move on to some more sophisticated tools for graphing that come from a package, and I'll write it down here, called ggplot2, which you may have heard of, okay, which allows us to do a lot more customization and graphing, and allows us a little bit more control over the output of our graphics. But I'd like you to kind of start with some of the basics, because they're used all the time for graphing in R, and especially you'll find in a lot of the documentation. ggplot takes a little bit longer to learn, and it requires more lines of code, right? So using a basic plot function can be very simple and effective. And I always want to make sure when you use kind of some of the simple functions that you include information that makes it interpretable. So I am all about interpretability of the data that we analyze and that we show to others. So number 1, it should have an insight, and it should also be descriptive in some way. So nicely formatted X and Y labels, titles, appropriate use of color, and the like. So I'm just going to maximize my screen so you can see a little better. So we're going to begin by reading in, and you can work with the markdown document that you've been working with so far. And you can include a code chunk, and just to go ahead and you can read in the CEO data. And so to do this, you notice that I create my variable CEO, and I'm using the readr library, and so I'm using the double colon here. I don't know if anybody's seen this syntax before, but this is a one way that you can reference the library, and then the function read_CSV, and pass in your data. And the only way that this works is if you have your data stored in that working directory that you set up before. So if you want, I'm going to cut and paste this line of code here if you just want to see it and copy it in yourself. But instead of saying library read R, so I'm showing you a slide with the information. I want you to do this in Markdown, Bill. So I'm gonna escape from my slide and kind of show you what I kind of want. So you're working in the Markdown document you created before, okay? I'm just gonna start just on line 12, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and insert an R chunk. And then the first thing I wanna do is I wanna read in my data. And then I can press run. You got your data. If it worked, you'll get an output that looks something like this. 2 columns that are integers, names, age, and salary. Okay. It's good to also start using Markdown syntax. Double pound sign. Step 1, read in data. Save. I mean, you don't have to knit it every time because it takes a little bit, but you kind of see where I am. Step 1, read in data. Okay, and then you could delete the sample that we work through, or you can keep it. All right. So let's think about what step 2 now is. Maybe you're taking a preview of it using the head function. Okay, just looking at, getting a quick preview of just like, what does this data look like? What's one thing we notice right off the bat? We have a column called age, a column called salary. And just make sure you mute yourself unless you want to say something, which I would appreciate.
The second row or the third row says, I don't know if I want to call those whatever those little triangle things, integer. So I guess that's kind of like the class.
Yeah, the class or the data type. Absolutely.
I don't think that's shown up when I ran anything. It doesn't just automatically give me the class usually.
Right. So when I use the head function, I'm able to see that you see when I imported it, it tells me that this column is an integer and this column is an integer. And then when I use the head function, which just gives me a preview of the first 3 lines of the data set, the data frame, I can see that, oh, it's telling me the actual data type as well. Okay, that's observant. Good. Anything else that we notice? What does 145 mean? Or 621? These numbers here.
Because there are thousands, right?
I hope so. I definitely hope so. So this is like mid-level CEOs and these are salaries. And you wouldn't know that unless you asked me who gave you the data or you had a data dictionary that told you so. But this is the kind of information, this is kind of how when you start looking at your data, you want to make sure you really understand what the numbers mean, okay? So here we're using salary in thousands of dollars. Good. So next step, we're going to begin by drawing a histogram. Okay, so in your R Markdown.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
I noticed that you had integers for your age and salary. On mine, it shows as double.
Okay, are you using a read underscore CSV?
I am.
Okay. So it could just.
I need to convert or.
No, double is actually better. So it could be using doubles just as more of a default. Maybe your reader library is more updated than mine, where it reads in things as doubles. Right now, mine is reading in things as integers because of the data is dictating it. But you do not need to change it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So now we're going to say step 2. Build a histogram of, let's say, salaries. So that's what you're writing in text. You're going to go ahead and insert an R chunk. Anybody know how to build a histogram or what the function would be to build a histogram? You can just share it in the text chat if you know. Yeah, Elena, thank you. Hist. Hist comes from the graphics package. That's the function I'm putting on line 18. Now, just because I tell you it is, doesn't mean that I am the source of all knowledge and truth. So you can just say $hist, and you can learn a lot more about that in the R documentation, which I'm showing here. Wow, lots of different parameters that it takes, right? Lots. And you can read about those parameters. But let's go through it. I'm going to go back to my source. So we're going to use the hist function. And what do we want to pass in as our parameter? I'm going to say we want to build a histogram of salaries, right? So I'm going to do something here. Attach CEO. This basically just says I'm attaching the data frame to my R session right now. So anytime I want to reference a variable in the CEO dataset, I can do that directly. So I can actually say something like his salary. I can press run, and I get a nice histogram here. Yours may look similar or different, where I have salary on the x-axis, right? This is a univariate display, and the frequency on the y. Questions on this? Let me go back to my deck to show you a few things here. So this is how we can make it a little bit more readable. Like I said, his salary, right? But I can add in other parameters. And these ones you can learn about, of course, by saying question mark hist to learn about it. I don't see the two rectangles. Alex. Oh, Chris is first with the question. Chris, what's your question? It's a knit.
Can you guys hear me?
I can.
I'm getting an error when I try to knit it. It's saying that I can't find the CEO object.
Ooh, okay. So what's the name of your data frame that you imported?
I believe I said CEO. Yeah, CEO.
Okay, so let's look at just an example of the code. So and you put this line ahead of the other line. So you're doing it in order, like top down, CEO first, read it in, and then you're building your histogram.
Yep.
Okay, so at the command prompt, do me a favor and type in CEO and see what happens. Are you able to see the data set?
Yes.
Okay. So it could be that. So now I'd like you to just try to knit it again and cut and paste your output, so I can help you debug. And while we're waiting for Chris to do that, Alex has a question.
How do you copy errors from our Markdown window?
You just try to highlight it if you can. I know that one's not that easy. It's kind of like you're like try to take whatever's in red and highlight and like paste it if you can, like that. Alex, did you have a question? Something about rectangles?
Yeah. So when you can you in the title histogram salary above that you have two rectangles.
Oh, you don't have to worry about my two rectangles.
Okay, because I don't see that.
Yeah, I've been running this code like all day, so this is just the R console toggle that just says how many objects are masks from the CEO. Maybe there's some NA values. So if I was to look at the CEO data set, I would probably find that I might have some values that don't have any. So something like I might have some NAs. I'm not sure. So I'd have to look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, let's see what else. Looking. Case sensitive. Yes, Jerome, but I think you were giving advice. All right, so Chris, I'll wait for your output to help interpret. So we're doing our histogram, and I mentioned other parameters that you can use, which you put right after the X variable, right? So one of those is main, and you can write your own title. And you can get so if you don't like that the word salary is in all caps, that comes directly from the variable. You can reword that if you want, and then you can also change the X and Y labels. So I can say X lab equals CEO salary bins. It's called. That's what the histogram represents, the ranges from 0 to 199, so 0 to 199,000. How many observations do we have versus 200 to 399,000? How many observations do we have? So I can run that, and you can see that my output is now different. Other things we can do that I'll highlight here. Okay, so you might also want to say salary bins in USD. You might want to say thousands of USD, right? Okay, so Chris, you spelt the word attach wrong. unless that's a typo you're giving to me.
That was probably a new typo when I was typing the error message in, but I think it's right in my other code. Yeah, no, because it's a command in their other code.
So if you're getting an error with the attach function, I mean, you can always just, type your hist and CEO $, salary, and you'll be on your way to creating your histogram. And then we can figure out how to debug that later if that's a bug coming. You want to make sure the attach function comes after you import the data, but I'm assuming you've done that. All right, wonderful. Nice, Elena. So being bothered by or wanting to keep true to what my label is here, Elena actually multiplied salary by 1,000. Awesome. Other things here we can look at, just explaining what these salary bins are. I did fix it here, right? Salary bins in thousands of USD and what the x-axis range shows, okay? Just so you know how to interpret this. And frequency is the default y-axis label. You can change that if you want, but it does represent what we're looking at, frequencies. The number of observations that fall within this particular bin, it's called, between 0 and 199, 200 to 399, 400 to 599, okay, and so on. You can go ahead and put labels on top and stuff. There's all extra things you can do. You can also set the breaks, so you can add more bins, okay? So since I had 6 bins before, if you remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these kind of rectangles here or bars, you could deduce that you could probably, by default, 6 is what R produced. So if I wanted to do 12, if I wanted to do every $100,000, I can get a lot more detail on the frequency and the shape of my data here. Questions on this part? Adding the breaks. So breaks is just adding another parameter. Set breaks equal to an integer. Now, look at the default, what R gave you, and you can take a multiple of that. That's usually the best way to go. It doesn't always say, if you put like 1,000 breaks, it may not do it. So R does pick the logical number of breaks based on whatever you enter or its default. So try adding breaks in like I did, and I'm going to try to help Chris. So Chris, maybe you could just talk on the mic and I can kind of help you.
Sure.
Yep.
Sorry, it took me a second to find the output section of the R Markdown to copy.
Okay.
But when I click the play button on the section in the Markdown file, it does generate the histogram and the head summary.
Okay.
It's just that when I try to knit it, then it doesn't work.
What's happening on line 22?
That's where I have the attach CEO before the head part, head CEO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can cut and paste like line 22 and below, just in a text chat. All right. So this piece here, I'm just going to type. So I think you should kind of do like, the backticks are open close bracket, and then type in your read your CEO.
Oh, not in between the curly brackets.
I'll just like, kind of I wrote CEP, but I meant CEO, right? And then your readr from there.
Yep, that fixed it.
All right. Woohoo.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, so now it's your turn. Create another histogram showing me the age, the histogram of the age variable. I'll go ahead and do this myself. I haven't built this one out. But the nice thing is if you've done one histogram, you've done all of them forever. So you can just say insert R, and here you can change this to age. Okay, and then you wouldn't say salary bins, age bins or age range, something like that. You can see your number of bin sizes here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You could you can change the bins. You can try 18 or something to see what would happen there. You might get a little bit more detail here. You can also click this and expand it just to get kind of a better sense of the counts. So the question is, Sarav, while everyone's doing the other histogram, multi-hist, what package does that come from? That's my question, Sarav. I don't hear anybody talking, so I'm just going to. So, Sarav, do you want to make sure that you require the psych package, or you say something like this, and then you use your multi-hist?
So, I mean, the psych package is already there. I mean, if I go to the package on the right hand bottom of my RStudio, and I see that it is ticked actually. I mean, I installed that psych package, and actually in the console it is working. If I'm putting this code in the console, it is working. Or only I am getting this error at the time of meeting. Even I put this code in markup and running it, it is giving me those histograms. But just when I'm meeting it, it is giving this error.
Okay, so why don't you cut and paste line 16 below in the text chat, and let me see if I can look at that. Okay, great. And I'm just going to move on, and then we'll get back to that. Okay, because we're just dealing with the first, just doing some basic histograms here. Good. So I hope everybody got to this point, and I'm just going to kind of mute everybody just for a second. Oh, okay, no, I don't hear any more noise. And we'll just move on to building some box plots. And hopefully you got into this point in one of the lessons, but it's a great way to show, the median, the range of your data, and also look at the spread. So to create a box plot, the usage is very simple. So the usage is just you use a function called boxplot. This comes from the graphics package, so we don't need to reference that. X is going to be our univariate data, so the column. We can add a main, and we can add, frame plot equals false, so we can remove the frame around it, just so, you can do some customization here. And you can also add a parameter called horizontal equals true or false, depending if you want a vertical box plot or a horizontal one. So I'm going to go ahead and just mute everybody because I'm hearing some background noise. Thanks. Good. So here's where we're keeping horizontal is set to false in terms of the orientation by default. So I didn't add that parameter after here. But if you said horizontal equals true, then we would simply see a box plot in horizontal view. You notice that I'm just passing in salary. I'm adding a nice title and then setting frame plot to false. That just means that don't create this box around it because it looks bad. And I'll show you in the code, what that may look like. Pardon me. Let's go ahead and copy this. You might want to, in your markdown, something say like create a box plot, 2 words, insert R chunk, something like this. And if I have frame plot equals true, which is the default, you'll see this frame around it, which looks rather ugly. Okay, so you can set that to false. See the output. And then you can also say horizontal equals true. And you can see the orientation of that. Okay, that might be more readable. Questions on the box plot? Here we're able to clearly see where our median is, which I think is pretty helpful. And we can kind of see this, this one observation, which is far outside of what we say is our range. Okay. Do I have a shortcut key to run an R chunk? Well, there's here, you can press the play button. I can highlight it, press command return, that runs it. And I have this arrow button here, which allows me to run it. So you get your commands here, your shortcut. Run selected chunk. So using the command and the return here, run current chunk, up arrow, command return, so you can see all your shortcuts. All right. So the ending lines here are showing the in a sense the range of the data from the value that's not an outlier from the data set. So it's not min and max necessarily. So this is the largest non-outlier, and this is considered the smallest non-outlier. And anytime you'll see an outlier, you'll go beyond what we call the whiskers here. And we're thinking about from quartile 3 to 4 over here. Okay, and the ending is the largest non-outlier value. Quartile 1 through 2 here. So we'll go back to the box plot here. Hope everybody can hear it. Alex, were you able to hear me? So you can go ahead and create a box plot to show the for the age variable. Okay, awesome. Did you hear my explanation of the box plot? All right. And so you can go ahead and create one for the age variable if you haven't already. And I'll go ahead and simply talk about the last basic time chart, and then I have a small activity for you to do. So now we're going to look at the relationship, of course, between age and salary and build a scatter plot. So my question is, we're going to build a scatter plot. What should go on the x-axis and what should go on the y-axis? Because I already showed you earlier with the pressure data set the function that we're going to use. I'm going to use the plot function, right? Good. So just want you to think through what goes on X and what goes on Y, not just kind of producing the plot in the R Markdown and making a beautiful document, but doing something that makes sense in terms of what you want to see. Is there any relationship between age and salary? Okay. You know, I think all of us would hope that our salary would go up as we age. And we kind of see that maybe with CEOs, that doesn't really happen. Okay, all the time. Excuse me. So you can go ahead and plot this, and you can plot it using the simple plot function, passing in X and Y, you know, like we said here, age and salary, adding a main, which would be your title. If you want to have an X label, if you want to label your X-axis, use XLab, Y-axis, YLab. And then you can get rid of that frame plot too. That's your basic usage. And you can create the chart that I just showed you before, but here's just the code so you can see it. Any way to increase the graph size? Good questions. So back to our markdown. So if I'm just looking at any chart, you have this, you can show this in a new window and you can see it bigger. You can also set your figure size when you print it out as your markdown document. So this is in this, between the curly braces, you could say figure, and you get all these other things you can do with your figure. Height, set that to a number. Usually we're thinking in terms of sometimes pixels. And R, you could just think about like, like a 4x3 or something like that. I could say this, figure width dot w width, and then you can set that. It takes a little experimenting. You can see how this kind of changed here in my output, but you can play around with the numbers. And depending on the orientation of your chart, let's say if I want to make this like, 6x4, try that again, run it. You can see the output, maybe how it changes. But you ultimately won't see the real effect until you knit it. And you open it in a web browser to actually see how that shows up. So I had that really, I could make it a lot wider and taller if I want to. All right, Alex, good. Glad I got that. So the only person's question I don't think I answered is Sarav. With his error using multi.hist. So did everybody get a chance to create that scatter plot? We can create it together if you want. I showed you the code for it, but we can also create it in our markdown. Example here. And insert our chunk and go ahead and use the plot function. And we said that we want age and then salary. Main equals, what's the relationship between age and salary? Maybe that's the question that we're trying to answer. We might have something xlab equals, I think we said age of CEOs, comma, ylab equals salary in thousands of USD. I did this real quick, something like that. This is what it looks like when you don't set frame plot to false. You can see how that just looks like yuck. So small aesthetic details do make a difference. Frame plot equals false. Okay. Looks a little bit better. You can kind of take a look at the bigger one. We'll learn about how to create minimum and maximum values for our axes. It's called ylim and xlim, different parameters. So we can even refine our charts even more. But I'm going to have you spend a lot of that time when we use ggplot to begin to modify more of the aesthetic features. But even in our simple plots, knowing what those parameters are, being able to specify those, really important. I hope you found this this part useful, and then seeing it in the context of your R Markdown. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is in your Materials tab, there's something called Exercise 5.2. And we have 20 minutes, and I'm going to give you maybe 10 minutes. I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes, but I'd like you to work on Exercise 5.2 if you haven't done it already. So there's a few data sets for you to download, okay? And I want you to create So you're working with this GDP data set, GDP for every country from like, I think, I don't know, 1960 to 2017 or so. And I just want you to extract the 2016 column. And then I want you to look at another identical file in terms of the countries, but it shows life expectancy. And I want you to extract the column for life expectancy for 2016, merge those two columns together in a new data frame, and then begin to work to create your scatter plot of GDP versus life expectancy, figure out what goes on X and what goes on Y, what makes the most sense, create a histogram of the GDP for 2016, and then a box plot. So I want you to practice creating those. With a new data set, you can even create a new R Markdown if you want to. You don't have to. Questions on this before I set the timer? So I'm going to set it for 8 minutes. This is like a hackathon, right? We have like a time limit. Okay, so we'll work for 8 minutes on exercise 5.2, and then I'll ask you to share your code, and we'll come back, we'll review it, and then I want to introduce you to some graphing using ggplot. 2016, Alex. It looks like we're at time. So why don't we go ahead and review this problem. I'll go ahead and end the timer. I know 8 minutes is, even with just like kind of a few simple data sets, it can be a lot, right? If you're kind of starting by putting together an R Markdown document and kind of like what I have here, you know, you have some of the basics, and what we can see is, like I'm saying here, step one, we want to import our data. So we're using the readr library, bringing in our GDP data set and our CSV. Once we've done that, you want to start by maybe formatting the data. You know, pull out, extract the country vector, extract the GDP. vector, and maybe even and then life expectancy. So I'm getting the country name, I'm getting the GDP for 2016, I'm dividing it, say, by 1 trillion, and the life expectancy from the life expectancy data frame, and bring that all together to create a new data frame. Here I'm calling it GDP LE, bringing together those three. And I'm giving you some nice, neat data. It might have some NAs in it, but all the country names align up. So you can do this kind of merging. It's probably nearly impossible without some other processing outside of kind of like the class environment, but I just wanted to get you kind of bringing together columns from different data sets. And then the next thing is to build your scatter plot, right? And so I'm just bringing in the 2016 column and the for my new data frame and the life expectancy. And I get something that looks like this, right? So in this case, you can certainly see that just using the basic plot leaves a lot to be desired in terms of what we're looking at. So we can kind of clean that up a little bit. If you're getting something and if you didn't normalize, if you didn't, I'm sorry, use a log scale or reduce your data by some value. I divided by 1 trillion just for GDP as an example. You could use this options here. SciPen equals 999. That will get rid of any scientific notation that you may have. Here I'm just using the plot function again, but I've added, I've turned my plot function from one line of code to several lines of code, but able to add some extra information, like really label my x-axis, my y-axis, give it a nice title, get rid of the frame plot, and even add a color for my points. In addition to adding a limit for my x-axis. So right here, I put a limit being 100 trillion. Here you notice that it's not labeled all the way by default, right? So I wanted to be able to do that. So you could do the same with having a y limit min and max value if you wanted to, okay? Those are some things to kind of think about. And then there, the other examples were to create a histogram. So I just want to show, you can change the color using I use, dark magenta here, just using the hist function. And you could also, of course, set your breaks here. Maybe the breaks here could be more. So you could say something like breaks equals, we'll just pick a number. Maybe I'll just say 16. And you kind of experiment a little bit with the breaks. So it might tell me figure margin's too large. So I might have to make my window bigger here. If you get that error, sometimes it's because of that. All right. Obviously, you can see that the number of count in terms of countries between 0 and, I don't know, maybe this is 5 trillion is in this big bar here. Pardon me. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we've gone over already how to do your box and whiskers plot, so I won't show that again. Obviously, you're using the box plot function. What I did want to show in kind of our remaining time here, 5 minutes, is kind of where we're headed with graphing and the like. I'll just bring up my using a package called ggplot2. And this again is just like, the syntax when you want to invoke the ggplot method for the ggplot2 package. You need to make sure you have it installed. But this is really, as you'll see, the R for Data Science book that's, that recommended for this class uses ggplot extensively. And so we will too. And the basic structure for a ggplot call is, here's our function ggplot. We pass in our data, which is the name of our tibble or our data frame. And then we pass in what we call our aesthetic values, AES, which looks like it's like a function within the function, right? And we pass in our X and our Y variable, or if it's a univariate display, maybe just our X, if it's a histogram, for instance. And then we use this plus sign here. So it's like we have this big function here, and then we're adding a plus sign to it, and then we add another function, geom underscore, and we type in whatever our chart type is from a list of chart types. So let's look at an example. So if we wanted to do a density plot, for instance, this would be the syntax for that. We pass in our CEO data set, our aesthetic parameters. We only have one because we're doing a density plot, showing the shape of our data. And we also have, we add the plus sign, and we add our what's called our geoms, is how we kind of say that, the geometry that we're using, right? So this is a density plot, and you can put in, you can pass in a color if you want to fill it. Okay, and then there are going to be a lot of other parameters you can add. You can say plus labels, and then you can start labeling your X and Y. You can start adding your titles. You can get rid of the grids in the background. A lot of other features that I'll go over when we're in class. But you know, if we're to do a histogram, we're not using breaks anymore. We're using bin width. Okay, so in this case, bin width, when I say 100, is based on the values here. Not the number of bins, but the width of the value. So I want it to be every $100,000, right? And so that's how I build a, and you can try another type of plot, like a violin plot, just by using geom violin, okay? If I wanted to do a bar chart, this would be an example of how you build a bar chart, which would show me the number of counts of people that are in their, you know, 30s, 40s, and so on. So ggplot is like, you know, very extensible. We can add different themes to ggplot, make our plots look like they've been published in The Economist or another publication. They look like they've been created by Edward Tufte. There are a lot of other ways that we can kind of customize the output of our data presentations. But I just want to pause right now because I want to give you that brief overview, and we have 1 minute just to see if there's any questions on this. I just want to make a few mentions. Aesthetics not found. Okay. So you want to make sure you have ggplot installed. Okay. And so ggplot is a package you're going to need to install. Alex, you can send me the full error message. So Rob, I sent you a private chat about your multi.hist and the code that I got to get it working. So just want to see, and I got to knit it as well. So just want to see how that's going. Follow up with you. I think I've answered everybody's question. I don't always have all the answers. Today I did. No, I'm just kidding. Now that I said that, I'm sure somebody will stump me. All right, you're very welcome, Mariana. We are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and just I'll stick around to see if there are questions.